name is Angelo Lopez. I am the editorial cartoonist for the Philippine News Today, a Filipino-American community newspaper based in the San Francisco Bay Area. And today I am very happy to have a conversation today with a wonderful poet named Melissa Tuckey and stuff. Hi, Melissa.
Hi, nice to be here with you.
Yeah. Now we've known each other online for about a decade and a half, but this is actually the first time Melissa and I are talking. And so I'm really excited about that because I've always admired you and stuff. We first met online because we both did blogs for Everyday Citizen. It's a progressive blog site that was in Kansas, I think. Is that right?
Mhm.
And then we became Facebook friends. And one of the things I admire about Melissa is when looking through her Facebook page, is just that she does a lot of important work as a poet activist and stuff. So, and usually I talk to cartoonists, but I wanted to learn more about poet activism because a lot of poet activists have been influential to me. Carlos Bulasan is a poet activist from the 1930s and 40s. Maria Werkheiser, I learned about her and I really admired her work in her life. Grace Paley, a New York activist who did work for the anti-war movement, the civil rights movement, the feminist movement. And now you're continuing this wonderful poet activist tradition and stuff. So I want to ask you for my first question is just how did you get into social justice poetry?
Thank you. It's so good to be here with you. I appreciate
Yeah.
this. Um, well, I became involved in social justice poetry. I because I have a background in activism. Um, and I became involved in activism when I was in freshman in college, and the first knock on the someone knocked on my dorm room door and with a petition about South African apartheid.
Oh,
Um, and she explained what that was, and I signed it. And the next thing you know, she invited me to go to a meeting of Students for Peace. And I became involved in that group. And that was my first exposure to activism. And following that, I stayed involved in political activism through college and ended up getting a job working for an environmental organization where I worked for a number of years, which was a very political job, working for safe disposal of chemical weapons in our
oh,
community
wow. Yeah.
and using writing for that. And so on. So for me, my writing was a tool I could use in movements. And then at some point, I went back to school for poetry to have
Oh,
time to actually write because
yeah.
I've loved writing for a long time, and but I had never said this is the focus of that I'm going to put my focus around this. And I went to graduate school and studied poetry, and then began to learn that there's a long history of poetry, um, social justice poetry, that's
Oh,
what we call it, and started finding poets who inspired me. And prior to that, the first poet who really provoked my imagination was June Jordan.
oh,
And she came to Kentucky when I was living there, working on this with this sort of environmental organization. And I had a chance to go see her read, and it was
mhm.
amazing experience. She was
That's so cool.
such a great, passionate, dynamic performer, and very political. Um,
Mhm.
it really moved me to be in that space with that language and that fierce
Yeah.
passion. and to see, wow, there's a different way you can be political besides writing grant proposals. Right.
And a
And
lot less boring.
yeah. Um, and it's poetry. And I just hadn't experienced that dimension like that before. And when I went to grad school, I had the opportunity to really study and learn about the whole history of poetry. And really, it's always been political.
Yeah.
um, Poets have always been political. Not every poet is aware or overtly aware of their politics in their work, but it's um, for lots of reasons, it's part of poetry. uh,
Oh, yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, part of our world. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you mentioned June Jordan and stuff. Who are your other poet activist heroes?
one of the first poets I encountered reading was Adrienne Rich,
Oh,
who I love, and she did such great work writing about the history of poetry activists.
yeah.
So I also, through her, read Muriel Rukeyser,
Yeah.
um, and many others. Other influences, June Jordan, Adrienne Rich, um, W.S. Merwin
Oh, yeah.
was
Yeah.
a influence on me. I loved just his light hand and what he does in so spare few
Yeah.
words. And
Yeah.
also, his politics are in there. Uh,
Yeah. I love a poem that he did about fathers that really touched me.
yeah, beautiful,
Yeah.
very touching. Um, and Lucille Clifton is
Oh,
another big influence. I just, I love her work, which is also spare, and how much she says, how much power is in these quiet
mm,
poems, and very political um, poet. Um, so many others. Gwendolyn Brooks, I really
yeah.
admire, and I'm not even mentioning contemporaries because there's so many, but so
Yeah.
many who influenced me. As a poet, we're really, reading poetry a lot, connecting with poets, being, that's how you. I don't think we exist without each other, right?
Yeah, it's a similar thing when people ask me what's my favorite cartoonist. There's
Right.
just too many and stuff, and I'm influenced by each cartoonist I like in some way and stuff. And it sounds the same thing with you, is that when you read a poet, a little bit of that poet becomes you, right?
Right. Yeah, and I also feel like each poet you read gives you a different kind of permission as an artist. Like,
Oh
oh,
yeah,
you can do that?
yeah.
Ah, no.
Yeah,
Um,
and yeah. One of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is I when I look at political poetry and then I look at political cartoons, there's a lot of similarities and stuff. And you mentioned one of them is just both of us, you know, we take a little bit of our heroes with us and stuff. They
right.
open new worlds that we, oh gosh, I didn't know I could do this and stuff. And then I
Yeah,
start doing it and stuff, right?
right. Yeah,
Yeah,
we learn from each other, and it's a kind of a communication that's happening, right?
yeah,
Um,
yeah. And then you filter that into your own voice into the world.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah. Like
yeah,
jazz music, right? Kind of
yeah,
in a different way.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm curious. You're talking about your influence and how you learn from them. Now, I like poetry, but I have to admit, there's a lot about poetry that I don't know. I consider myself more of a novice poetry lover. I used to work in a library. So the way I discovered poets is just if you go to the 800s, there's
Hmm.
just a ton of poetry books, and
Oh,
I
nice.
used to process a lot of those books. And I thought, I'm kind of curious. That's how I learned about Muriel Rukeyser and Grace
Oh,
Paley.
wow.
I just happened to process them, and I got curious to know. If you look in
Huh.
the back of the book, they had all this praise, like they were wonderful for the civil rights movement and this and that. And I thought, yeah, I never heard of these people. But you know, for somebody who just wants to learn about poetry, is there any advice you'd give them? Or
Yeah, there's so many resources online. So, some websites that people could check out. Split This Rock
yeah,
has a great website, which is socially engaged poetry, political poetry. And you can search by theme.
oh,
So, if you're looking for a particular poem, you can find it there. But also, you can find artists who might interest you. They publish a poem a week, so it's constantly, you can get that in your mailbox if you're
no, yeah,
interested. Um, the the Poetry Foundation Poetry Foundation also has a really nice online database of poetry and publishes a monthly journal that is published online. Um,
um,
and um, and in your neighborhoods, hopefully, there's, hopefully, I think going to spoken word events is a great way to find
yeah,
community and poets, also for those who live in communities that have cultural activities like that.
yeah, yeah. Well, there used to be a Sunnyvale Art Gallery in where, we're near where I lived and stuff. And I didn't realize that there were poets in our area until I happened to wander into an open mic thing, and I heard a couple poets recite, and I thought, gosh, this is great. And I didn't know this existed.
Oh, yeah. So nice.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think that there's something really special about being in the room together and having spoken word or poetry um, be in the air, that it's such a deep way to connect. Um,
yeah,
even if even as an audience person, you're connecting in a different way,
yeah,
with other humans who are sharing the experience. And uh, yeah, and then the spoken word is just amazing because of the invitation also to others to share um, the word, to share the mic. um,
yeah,
Open mics are, you know, also really exciting place for people
yeah.
to try it out.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Now, you mentioned Split the Rock. You helped organize that, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Split the Rock Poetry Festival. And you also helped organize the DC Poets Against the War,
Mm-hmm.
right? And could you tell me about those two things? Like what is Split the Rock and what's the DC
Sure.
Poets Against the War?
Yeah, so DC Poets Against the War started in response to the Gulf War
Yeah.
um, build up, or the not Gulf War, that's the wrong war. It's the Iraq War.
Oh, yeah.
It
Yeah.
to me, it's all one war because it really started in the 90s and kept going. But the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War, and poets around the country had readings called into action by Sam Hamill,
Yeah.
who put out a call and put up a website and called for poems against the war, and he got thousands of poems in hours, like crashed the website. And
Oh,
um, and just the response was huge. And then lots of poets around the country organized um, anti-war poetry readings.
oh,
And so DC Poets Against the War, started by Sarah Browning, a friend of mine,
oh,
um, came up in that moment,
oh,
and and continued, and was one of the most vibrant, I think, examples of a community, of one of the, local poet against the war um, movements. And we were in DC, and so the war was maybe more tangible to us in a sense that, you know, being near the Pentagon, being near the president and the Congress,
Oh yeah, you're right.
and and our traffic would stop so that, you know, the president can drive through and they'd reroute you, and it's like your life is
Yeah,
viscerally affected by who's in the White House.
yeah,
um, and so the war felt really big there, and you know, the Pentagon got hit in
yeah,
September 11th, so there was also, you know, all of that. But um our also poets were, or, you know, the protests happen in DC, and there's a lot of political organizing in DC, and so DC Poets Against the War started offering poets up for readings at activist meetings and fundraisers. And then at one point, we marched in DC with
oh,
poets from around the country. Martina Spada was one of the poets who marched with us. We had
oh,
100 poets, and we carried
wow.
signs with poems on them,
Oh,
with lines from poetry. And I organized that particular protest, um, and put out a call online and received poems from around the world. We
wow.
received poems from people in Iran, Afghanistan, Iraq, and elsewhere. And uh, it was amazing. So, and we did that a few times, marched together, and uh, something was born.
Yeah,
Sarah edited 2 versions of a DC Poets Against the War
yeah.
um, journal. So there's a record of
Those
collections of
signs.
poems from
Oh,
those, and lots of readings that came out of it. Um, and then Split This Rock came out of DC Poets Against the War.
oh,
Uh, and out of that sort of experience of having poets from around the country calling us, because we were organizing this march during protest, to say, you know, what's happening in DC? Or even if a poet came to DC on vacation, at that time, they would be looking for opportunities to do something political,
oh,
and calling around asking, what can I do? Um,
yeah,
uh, and so Split This Rock came out of that. Um, Sarah Browning uh, thought, oh, we should organize a festival
yeah.
and bring everybody together. And so a bunch of poets in DC sat around a table together and came up with a dream list of poets and invited all of them.
Oh,
And thinking, oh, you know, we had no money, no budget.
yeah.
You know, we didn't have a location, a venue, nothing, just this idea. And maybe someone would come, right? And every person we invited said they would come,
Oh,
uh,
that's neat.
even
That's
though we
good.
hadn't figured out how we would get them there or what would happen. We had
Oh,
27 poets say yes,
oh, wow.
um, of our favorites. And then we spent 2 years organizing to get the festival off the ground, to make it happen,
Oh,
and to do the logistics and to build it up. And then it happened, and poets came from and they came from around the country to
oh,
this festival, not just the featured poets, but, you know, lots of people. And we ended up having panel discussions on political and poetry issues, um,
oh,
an open mic, and then just readings for 4 days.
oh.
And
That sounds great.
it was amazing. And then the last day of it, we did uh, a protest together, um,
Oh, okay.
and read a poem, a cento together, where every person there brought a line of poetry and just stood up to read it. Um,
Oh, yeah.
so
Is
yeah,
it kind of cool being with your peers and stuff? Because like I know when I go to a cartoonist convention, I'm always like, you know that sense of like you're kind of in awe that you're with
right.
a cartoonist you admire. Is that the same thing with you with, oh, it's June Jordan, or oh
Oh,
wow, it's
yeah. Very much. Yeah. And there was that level of it, all of our favorite poets walking around. And then there was also the level of all the people we met, who were peers and who were part of these conversations.
yeah,
Um, and it, you know, including all of our favorite poets. We had great conversations about, making art in this time, and
yeah,
how sharing resources, and lots of cross-cultural conversations. um,
um,
the festival, we made a commitment when we first began to plan it to make it at least 50% people of color
oh yeah,
that we
wow,
featured.
yeah,
And so, and it ended up, each one, we've been going for more than 10 years. Each of our festivals had a much stronger commitment than that.
yeah,
Um, but we also, you know, had conversations on all kinds of diversity issues together, and
yeah,
political issues and topics and themes. And anyway, out of the first festival we decided to become a nonprofit and to keep it going, because
oh.
lots of people who came were saying, this, I've been looking for this all my life, because
Yeah,
poetry for a while was pretty, there was like a apolitical backlash, that came from the Red Scare and
yeah,
McCarthyism. I mean, there
yeah.
were real penalties on political poetry, um, and there was a time when, um, yeah, I think some of those, there were consequences,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know?
Carlos Bulasan, that poet that and I think both he and Muriel Rukeyser, both of them suffered
Right.
from McCarthy and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And then some of those poets who couldn't help but be political were all political.
yeah,
Were more, I think, a little more marginalized for a while.
yeah,
Um, and so, um, the the war changed that. I think it just made it more apparent that, wait, we have, of course, poetry is political.
yeah,
Even if you think you're not being political, that's a stance.
yeah,
That you're leaving politics out is a privilege, right?
yeah. And you're leaving out a lot of great poets.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. And that's shifted entirely, since then. Yeah, and especially, left out, or the poets of color, and
yeah,
um, other marginalized cultures that, it's not an option to be political in this
yeah,
country for a lot of people.
yeah.
Um, just reality is not apolitical. It's right.
And that's an
So
issue I face as a Filipino American cartoonist and stuff, is that there's too many issues affecting our community for me not to address them and stuff.
right.
Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'm curious. I'm a political cartoonist, and one of the issues that we've been struggling with for the past few years is you know how this time is more polarized, and a
Right.
lot of people are in these kind of ideological bubbles.
Right.
um, One of the things that I've talked to other cartoonists, and we worry that our cartoons may be preaching to the choir and stuff.
Right.
Is that something you worry about as a political
Yeah,
poet?
that's a great question, because I hear it all the time.
Yeah,
And poets worry about it all the time. Are we just preaching to the choir? What are we doing? I mean,
yeah,
my personal view is that the choir needs to be preached at.
yeah, yeah,
I mean, I don't think, number one, I think it's a simplistic way to look at art. or
Yeah.
poetry, that it's preaching, because it's not preaching. I mean, I don't think good poetry preaches.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's a lot more nuanced than that, what poetry does, and more complex, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes the poetry is a hug, you know,
Yeah.
and it's a voice telling you you're not the only person who cares about this.
Yeah.
And that is really important at a time when I think one of the biggest threats of this time we're living in now is um, to be dispirited and to
Yeah.
give up.
Yeah.
And isolation makes that harder.
Yeah.
And the overt moves made by our governments
Yeah.
in the last 10 years, increasingly so, more and more, um, these these are, it's hard to maintain hope, right?
Yeah.
And I think that poetry is, um, among other things, a way, and cartoons probably are also very much
Yeah.
a little voice that says, Psst, you're not alone.
Yeah, yeah. That was the conclusion I got and stuff because I was worried about that too. But then I thought maybe it's just to because authoritarian governments they want to isolate people who dissent. They
Right,
want to make people in the Philippines especially.
right,
When I was making my cartoons, I was worried. I'm making these cartoons critical of Duterte, but Duterte's popularity right now is around 80% or
right.
something. And I kept thinking, is anybody really listening to my cartoons and stuff? And I began to think that, well, maybe my cartoons now are for the 20% who don't like him and stuff.
Right.
If I can't reach the 80% who do like him, maybe I can let the like you were saying, let the
Yeah,
20% know that they're not alone.
right,
So yeah, thank you for that because I think one of the things I like about poetry is you can put into words things that we feel but don't know how to say.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I think, and language is so important to
yeah,
struggle. I mean, it's what is used to destroy us
yeah,
by authoritarian um, countries and other, war and whatever.
yeah,
It's done through language, and so our ability to maintain control of our language
yeah,
and to offer something more complex than the simplistic jargons,
yeah.
that we are exposed to in those um,
Yeah.
settings is so important. Um, yeah, I'm a preacher for art and poetry. I mean,
No, no, no. It's important because I think poets put nuance in issues that can easily become black and white and
yes.
stuff. Yeah,
And also, a lot of poems are telling, or we're giving lived experience. So
yeah,
it's embodied, it's physical, it's cultural,
yeah,
it's language that's personal, right? And um, if there is politics in a poem, it's with all of that,
oh,
you
yeah,
know? And those are the things that, you know, uh, are complex and make our lives interesting and beautiful,
yeah,
too, right? And sad and
yeah.
happy and whatever, but we need access to that complexity of
Oh,
each other, the complexity of each other.
yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. Well, you edited a book, Ghost Fishing,
Right.
um, an eco-justice poetry anthology, and I look a lot at the Facebook page you administer,
Mhm.
Eco-Justice Poetry and Activism Community. Um, can you tell me a little bit about eco-justice poetry?
Sure.
And can you also tell me why is the ecology important for you as an issue?
Thank you. And thank you for being involved in that community. I've really
Okay.
enjoyed
Even though I'm not a
your
poet,
presence there.
I like what you post.
Yeah, well, I like what you post there too. Thanks. I appreciate that. Um, yeah, so Eco-Justice Poetry is so I edited Ghost Fishing, an Eco-Justice Poetry Anthology, which I mentioned I have a background in environmental activism.
Yeah.
And as part of that background, I learned about environmental injustice, and just the way that um, some people in our culture receive more protection
Yeah.
when we can make environmental laws and regulations and all of this than others, and particularly around race
Yeah.
and class. And so that's one part of what eco-justice is a recognition of that reality. Um, it's also a recognition of the fact that American poetry, our ideas of nature poetry are problematic.
Oh,
Traditionally, have some issues that we need to grapple with. Um, that really not just poetry has to grapple with it. Our culture has to grapple with our relationship to nature, right?
yeah. Yeah.
And part of that relationship has to do with how we treat people, and part of that relationship has to do with how we treat the land.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, those two things are connected. They aren't separate things.
Um,
And uh, if we look back at our idealistic version of what a nature poem is, and go back in our history and how we look at it, um, we have some ideals of nature as outside of human.
oh,
um,
yeah.
I mean, nature as a separate place from humans, wilderness as this pristine place we go to and visit and luxuriate. And it's
Yeah.
usually a male, and it's usually a white male in our poems that goes out there and discovers great vistas and is inspired and brings that back. And um, that's a simplistic way of looking at it, because there's beauty in all of those poems, but there's also a difficult relationship
Yeah.
there, because um, if we look at history, those places in nature were never empty places. They're places where people live.
Yeah.
In this country, it's places where indigenous people lived.
Yeah.
And even our national parks, they removed indigenous people to make these parks
Oh,
so that
yeah.
we could have this wilderness experience that
Yeah.
um, is problematic. And
Yeah.
so that's a long answer to say that eco-justice poetry is poetry that's interested in looking at um, those relationships, and doesn't look at nature as outside of us, but as part of us. Um, and and that considers social justice issues
Yeah.
um, as part of what we're looking at
Yeah.
when we think about nature.
Yeah.
Um,
I never thought of the issue in that way. So thank you for explaining that.
Thanks. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, so you know, there's also a beautiful history of we go to nature poems for comfort, you know,
Yeah.
and beauty, and a taste of what nature is, and all of that is nice. um, but nature is more than that, you know.
Yeah.
um, and poets have tried to find a lot of different avenues for the ways that nature is more than that in contemporary times. but
Yeah.
um, but one of the ways nature is more than that is it includes pollution.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
you know, and subjugation of people and the environment. And
yeah,
yeah, so the Eco-Justice Project is looking to the anthology brings together poets at that intersection and looks at poetry from that view. And it's a culturally diverse anthology,
yeah,
and it is divided by theme, and different environmental themes
yeah.
run through the book, and different ways of looking at it, but all of them at that intersection of social justice and the environment.
Yeah, I'm glad you poets are grappling with that issue. One, it's an issue I don't know very much about, but also it sounds like you're grappling it in ways that makes it more understandable for an average person like me who doesn't know about issues like that and
Mm,
stuff. So I thank you for
thanks.
that. It's, well, not
Thanks.
just you, but all the eco-justice poets
Yeah.
that are under that you're representing and trying to give voice to and stuff. So thank you.
Right. I mean, they're doing the work, and really, an anthology is just a collection of what's happening out there, right?
Yeah,
But uh, it's also a thinking about how our cultural conversations, and where
yeah,
we center them, and who's in them,
yeah.
and you know what
Mhm.
are the parameters of that conversation.
Yeah, I think when I've dealt with environmental issues, it's not on that. It's just on how indigenous people in the Philippines are struggling because multinational corporations
Mhm.
are, mining, agriculture. They're trying to pressure a lot of indigenous people off their lands because usually the lands they live in are full of rich natural resources they want to get into and stuff. And so,
Right.
yeah, but I don't, it sounds like with the eco-justice poetry, it's more nuanced and stuff. So, and actually stuff that never occurred to me and stuff. So,
Yeah. Well, that's nuance. I mean, it is nuanced because it's poetry, but eco-justice poems look at mining,
yeah,
and look at um, issues like that. And again, it's that question of who's writing the poems and what are they experiencing in their world, and that's what they write about, right? And
yeah,
so it's also a question of who's at the table. um,
yeah,
if I'm a Philippine poet and going through, and I live near that, or I care about it, then that's part of my reality
yeah,
that's
yeah,
worth writing about, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, you wrote two books, Tenuous Chapel and Rope as Witness, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering first, could you tell me about those two books, and could you do us the honor of reciting a few of your poems? And
Sure.
depending on whether you have time, you can, you send me an email on the poems you're going to recite. If you want
Yeah.
to recite all of them, feel free to do
Sure.
that. Or
Great.
if you don't have time, recite as much as you, because for me, my morning is pretty open right now.
Right.
So just
Okay.
depending on the time, feel free to recite. But
Thank
first,
you.
tell us about your books.
Thanks. Well, my first book is Rope as Witness, and it's a chapbook, so it's a smaller book. And my second book is Tenuous Chapel, and that is officially my first book because
Oh, it is. Oh, okay.
it's a full length book. Um, but they're both books. But they both of those collections, there's a lot of the poems from Rope as Witness in Tenuous Chapel. Um,
Oh,
uh, kind of circle around that time period in DC with the war,
oh,
that I was talking about, because I was living there then, and was really um, occupied in my being with concern
yeah.
about that. So there's a lot of poems coming from that time and space in that book. And it's a first book, so it has also just whatever poems were good enough to fit into the book, or worth whatever poems were worth putting in the book.
Yeah.
um, and yeah, that's that book. It was chosen by Charles Simic, who recently died, who's another poet I greatly admire, for a first book award, which was
Yay.
a big
Congratulations.
honor. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so that's that. And I'm working on my next book of poems now, and it's currently titled War Edition.
Oh, okay. When do you see that being published?
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
Well, hopefully soon. But publishing poems is a whole nother conversation. It takes a long time
Oh,
to have a publisher for a book and to have the book up to par to put out there. So
oh,
um,
okay. Okay.
that's in progress, and I hope it's soon. It
I hope
takes
so. Let me know. I would love to
Thanks.
purchase a
I
book.
will for sure. Thank you.
Okay.
Um, I selected some poems to share, and I chose newer
Oh,
ones from that book, because they're the ones I'm interested in at this point.
oh yeah, yeah,
Most interested in, right? They're the new ones.
yeah.
Um, but and I didn't put them in some kind of order.
Oh,
Taking a look. Sorry. Video. Um, all right. I will just start with, I'll just read them in the random order that they're in. And there's
yeah.
just a handful. So the first one is titled Poem for the TSA Officers Who Rifled Our Bags to Dump Our Homemade Jam We Were Carrying as Gifts. True story.
What is? Oh, okay. I
um,
like the humor in it already.
Thanks. I went to a wonderful gathering at Black Earth Institute, um, uh, where we were fed and given all this beauty. This is not the poem yet, just backstory. And they sent us home with these jars of jam,
Oh,
and some of us were riding the airplane home together, and or going to the airport together, and we went through customs or the TSA together, um, and they dumped all of our things into the garbage. It was very sad, and
did they
so
think
I
it was
wrote,
a security threat or?
yeah,
Oh, did you?
don't take even a small jar of jam with you in your
Yeah.
bags. It's
They
just
might mix it with peanut butter and make a sandwich, and
oh my
who
god,
knows what'll happen then.
right. So this is a poem in honor of that jam.
Oh,
Poem for the TSA officers who rifled our bags to dump homemade jam we were carrying as gifts. You never can tell what those peaches were doing naked together in that Guatemalan basket, or how the moon whispered to an underground of resurgent garlic. Winters when you thought the living world asleep. Beware the last red peppers of autumn, how they fatten into gorgeous fists raised at dawn in solidarity. Trust not the pickled relish. Keep an eye on those candied beets. Know that the bees are amassing in goldenrod, hoping to keep their queen alive, as battalions of crickets play violin in the tall, anonymous grass. Trust not the sweat sticky kitchen, uprising of steam as grapes roil, a delirium of kettle shaking goodness. Keep an eye on that elder who ladles the whole sweet mess into a bell choir of singing jars, each ping rousing, unexplainable delight. Know that in kitchens throughout this land, such sweetness is gathering daily.
Oh.
Thanks. Here's another poem related to food, one of my great loves. And it's Monsanto, Drunk in the Garden. And it's in the voice of Monsanto. Come up, my sleeping herds of thistle, my stinging and resolute theocracies, my unbound glory, my sunning stars, my stranglehold of monopoly. Come up and waddle through the dirt with me. Drink deep this chlorinated song, sprung lonely from a nozzle of pure joy, where I find myself most mornings weeping. Be brave, my little florets. Make haste to catch the light before it's gone. Open your petals to science. Surface the hidden world. Break chloroplast and peptide hormone. Make blue my red, my sweet burning bank of fire. My parrots, my garden of lambs, my pig parts, my onions. Come stir on a light breeze as bees fall to sleep in the crimson afterlife. We will be wealthy and famous forever.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Thanks. And the next one I wrote while I was serving as Tompkins County Poet Laureate
Oh,
in my county. And
congratulations for that.
Thank you. It's such a fun honor. And you actually get calls from people saying, you know, we need a poet. Would you like to come to this event and that and do this and write a poem? And, you know, it's so much fun.
Do you have like a card saying, in case of emergency, call poet and stuff?
Right. That's nice. I'm going to put that on my card. Thank you. That's perfect. Yeah. And so one of the honors of that was I got to teach poetry in the local jail.
Oh, wow.
Which is one of the things in this poem. Poetries. Praise the path that poetry makes, from the prison cell to the legislative chamber, from the choir mouthing an ancient hymn to the bookstore with clumsy chairs. Praise children. Praise all that is taken up by osmosis in those shiny, still, unbroken leaves. Praise the wind, knotted and spitting, with mouth and tongue, guttural howls tried on thin air. Elders who priest us, young ones who witch us. Praise whoever is standing alone on a stage stammering, or in a holding cell asking for a book. The way we lumbering animals take heart and heart and heart again in what moves us to the edge of ourselves.
Wow.
Thanks. Oh, there's more lines.
Oh, there, oh.
Sorry. Oh my gosh. Okay.
No, it's okay.
I do want to read the last line.
Okay.
Geez. It ended okay there. edit. No. I'll read the last 4 lines. Halo
Okay.
of light rounding the corner. Reader awake under one bulb still burning. Strange countries we would have feared had we not heard the singing. And that's that.
Hey, that
Thanks.
was wonderful. The last 4 lines were just, they added something to the poem. So.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad. my gosh. And this next one is pretty new.
Oh,
Um, Account and repair. And I wrote this in response to Ukraine stuff, etc.
yeah.
Account and repair. The balance sheet is fraught. We are over budget, nothing but war today, and tomorrow war. Someone should shovel the ice from the sidewalk. Someone should ask where all these dollars are going, like birds into the air, like commas, or notes on a page, or bullets fired at no one in particular, painfully articulate. Someone should ask for an accounting. Someone should make gravel onto the ice before night, rake gravel onto the ice before night falls, while there is still light in us, warm bodies moving as if in sleep. Someone should leave breadcrumbs for the rodents, compost for worms, an apple for a hungry bear. Someone should call up this sunrise, scatter ash for the living, call a truce, make a pot of soup, translate this grief, sit with the dead, name and repair this torn fabric, name and repair this living grief, our planet.
Wow. Is
Thank
there a lot of activism going on about the Ukraine right now? I'm curious. Or
you. No, you know, the far right is having activism, I think,
oh
because they're connecting to Putin.
yeah.
Um, and there is poetry activism. We have in our community a lot of Ukrainian poets
Oh
who have been sharing poems from Ukraine and raising money for Ukraine and uh, connecting us to the human weight of what is happening there.
yeah.
Um, and but yeah, I don't see a lot of activism, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you?
No, no, I actually I don't and stuff. That was one of the things I'm curious about and stuff. Yeah, it
Yeah,
just occurred to me. I don't know any Ukrainian cartoonists, but I'm sure there's some out there and stuff. But
right. Yeah, it would
yeah,
be
and you,
interesting to connect and see what they're doing.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But it's a beautiful poem. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah. Um, yeah, Ukraine is is an interesting situation. As someone, I've spent my whole life opposing war. I feel
Yeah,
like I care a lot about that, and I do oppose war. And at the same time, I feel like people have to have a right to defend themselves.
yeah,
So it's complicated.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah. But
uh,
like I said, that's something as a poet you grapple with and stuff. And I'm glad that you grapple with it because you put like I said before, you put nuance on an issue that could be black and white and you're honest about the contradictions
mhm,
inherent in any situation stuff. Like one of the things with as a cartoonist and stuff, there are multi-panel cartoonists who can put nuance, but
mhm.
I tend to do single panel and I struggle because the form single panel format doesn't give me opportunities to put nuance that a
Right.
multi-panel cartoonist could, and you as a poet can put nuance that I can't.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never thought about that with regard to single panel. And
Yeah.
is there a reason you choose that?
Well, that's what the newspaper.
That's
I
what
would
they
love.
give. That's what they
I would
want.
love to do multi-panel and
Yeah,
stuff, but I think one of the problems I have is dialogue. My
right.
dialogue is when I read my dialogue, I keep thinking I don't know if I'd want to have a conversation with somebody who speaks like that.
Uh,
But I
okay.
know I've been talking to cartoonists who do multi-panel cartoons, and one of the things I admire about them is they can put nuance and complexity into a situation and stuff.
Right.
Yeah, whereas
Yeah,
my thing is I have to actually simplify and stuff, and I
right,
struggle because I know that issue is more complex than what I'm portraying. But
right. That's so interesting. I think that your single panel, I can see why the newspaper wants those too, because
yeah,
they give people immediate access
yeah, yeah,
and a real like light bulb
yeah,
kind of connection, which is something too.
yeah. But you lose something too and stuff.
Yeah.
That and what I admire about your poetry and stuff is uh, there one is that each reader can interpret it what you're saying,
Mhm.
through their filter, but also that there are hidden feelings that you bring out in the words that you say and stuff that are complex, and you grapple with things that my cartoons don't have to grapple with.
Mhm. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you grapple with a lot in your cartoons, but
No,
yeah, the nuances, yeah, it's important. I mean, I think that's why different arts are important for different things.
different things. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that nuance and complexity are one of the things that poetry
It's
itself,
very good at.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, uh, you want to hear another?
Yeah, I do. I'd love to hear as many as you want.
Okay,
No, I
let's
like.
stay all day.
I'm wondering though. I mean,
Yeah.
I guess with poetry on a page as opposed to poetry when you say it and stuff. When you hearing what you're saying, it adds something and stuff. Do you enjoy speaking your poetry?
Yeah, I mean, it's it's an oral tradition, and
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
so uh I read my poems, I hear my poems more than I see them. You know what I mean?
Oh, okay.
I hear them first, I think, and when I'm writing, it's a voice, and that I hear as I'm writing. So you know, there's music and poetry, and there's a lot to giving it air. It's meant to be on the air. It's meant to be in the air. It's a kind of music,
Oh,
um, I think, and so that part is important. And I love being able to read them out loud, and also share them. Yeah,
yeah,
because I think that's like how you imagine them to be in your head
yeah.
when you write is in the air.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Um, but also, I always learn, like, I miss live performances. There aren't very many of them in this
Oh,
time. And I've done a lot of Zoom things, and this is fun too. This is especially fun just with one person who wants to
oh,
hear
yeah, yeah, yeah,
poems. But
yeah,
um, something's really missing when you give a reading online, which is, you get feedback from a group of people when you read your poem,
yeah.
sighs and laughter and silence, um, and squirminess, whatever it is. Like, I
Oh,
think,
I'm not squirming. I'm
no,
just
you're not squirmy.
yeah, there's a cat. I'm in my in-laws
No,
house right now, and I love the cat, but I'm a little bit allergic, so
yeah.
I'm blowing my nose
I
once.
I didn't think you were. I didn't. Yeah, but um, yeah, you learn things. It's a communion. Um,
Oh, okay.
anyway, I'm just enjoying the one-on-one nature of reading with you. It's
Oh,
cool.
thank you.
Thanks. Um, okay, here's a poem. I started a series of poems responding to newspaper headlines.
Oh,
And so I've been collecting newspaper headlines, and I kind of imagine my own newspaper coming out of it that would be
oh,
poetry. And it's a project that I'm enjoying playing with. Um, the newspaper headline for this is Pittsburgh Bridge collapses hours before Biden visits to discuss infrastructure.
Oh.
Nothing can stop the bellicose engine hurling itself round and round above our heads, spotlight trailing the ground below as if from some remote guard tower. Our coyote silence is broken. A yellow dog scrambles in the dirty snow. It is late. We all know it. Some of us are walking for pleasure in the darkness. Some of us are casting out demons from hospital beds. From the edge of town, tents have been erected against the bitter cold. A stream runs beneath the ice, seeking lower ground. Fish huddle at the bottom of a stream pool, conserving energy. Some have burrowed into the sediment. Bridges are communist, medical care, highways. To show up early is to be eager. To show up late is to miss the whole first act. And that's Pittsburgh Bridge collapses before Biden visits to discuss infrastructure.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks. It's a prose poem, so it's shaped like prose.
Oh, okay. Okay. Isn't that Philip Levine, I guess? Does he do kind of, I just discovered him a little bit and stuff,
Does
but
he do prose poems? I don't. I imagine he might be. Well, he does more long lines.
oh, okay.
Um,
Okay. Okay.
and they're narrative poems. And so, uh, yeah, they tell stories and they do have these beautiful long lines.
Oh, okay. So I guess it's different. Okay.
A little
Like I was saying.
different, but similar. It's an interesting, yeah, connection.
No.
Yeah, I'll read. I'm just gonna read one more. This is the last one, and then
Oh,
ends. It's also prose, so a short prose poem. Listen. Believe young people who say they are triggered. Check for bombs. Keep hiding places clear. Tell them they have a right to be safe. Believe the nape of your neck, the back of your knees. Believe moths and butterflies and hummingbirds. Believe bees. Believe ice and dirty snow. Believe the intimacy of birds. Believe children, their faces red from packing snow. Believe libraries, the ministry of sound. Listen to water, the hymn of our connected lives, the way sunlight moves through the shadow of trees. Trust mountain, trust solid shoes, trust darkness and the life of the soul.
thank you. That's
Yeah,
wonderful.
thanks. Thanks for listening.
Sure, sure. And I want to wish you well on the book that you're working on. And I do hope that it gets published soon and stuff. But yeah,
Thanks.
let us know and stuff. But yeah, so I guess this is the end of our talk for now. I want to thank you again and
Thank
stuff. And
you.
whatever you have planned for this year, I want to wish you well.
Thank you. And same for you. It's so nice to connect on this level.
Yeah.
And yeah, I look forward to seeing more of your work
Oh.
also.
Thank you too and stuff.
And
So.